Welcome to the 2024 Traveller Mayday event. I'm your host, Frank Sucardi from CyborgPrime Games. I have with me in the studio some guests from Ad Astra Games. Hey guys, why don't you introduce yourselves and what you do? Let's start with Ken.
I'm Ken Burnside. I am the chief designer, editor, monkey wrangler, chief subordinate to Theoden Cat, the upper management of Ad Astra Games. It is my job to make sure that products more or less come out and write some of them when I have time.
Mm-hmm. All right. And Mike Llaneza, tell us about yourself.
Hi, I'm the Traveller line editor at Ad Astra Games. So far put out the Squadron Strike Traveller box set, and we're in slow but real production for a Fleet Book 2, which will cover the Solomani Rim War, level 14 Imperials versus Solomani, and then the tech level 15 fleet shows up, and the war starts going really badly for the Solomani.
Awesome.
So that's all the way with some Aslan slip ships in the mix to bring them up to what by Book 1 standards is a full range of ships. Imperium's going to end up oversized, but well, they've got a lot of ship designs to cover.
All right, cool. All right, welcome, Mike. And next we have our friend Jon Zeigler. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, thank you, Frank. My name is Jon Zeigler. I've been involved with Traveller pretty much since my teenage years, so it's been a long time, mostly as a player and as a fan. Back in the 1990s, early 2000s, I was doing a lot of writing and editorial work for Steve Jackson Games, mostly for their GURPS Traveller, their GURPS line. And when they got the GURPS Traveller license and we're going to be working with Lauren Wiseman to produce that, I was nicely positioned to say, oh, hey, yeah, I know Traveller well. Can I write some stuff for you? I ended up writing, co-authoring, contributing to, later editing something like 7 full-size books and a bunch of smaller products for GURPS Traveller over the years. In fact, for about 18 months to 2 years, I was backing Lauren Wiseman up as the line editor for GURPS Traveller. Interesting part of my freelancing career. I rather quite enjoyed that. Since they lost the license, I've been sort of hovering around the fringes of Traveller until recently. I began working on a book which is titled Architect of Worlds. The goal of that book is to allow readers who might be game players, who might be game designers, who might be science fiction writers, to sort of do scientifically plausible world design for interstellar universes. This is a takeoff on work I've done before. Back when I was doing writing and editorial work for Steve Jackson Games, I probably wrote 3 distinct world design systems for GURPS and GURPS Traveller. So this is more recent. It's, I believe, about to come out with Ad Astra Games. So that's why I'm here.
Awesome. Well, welcome to the Mayday event. We're glad to have you here.
Glad to be here.
All right,
Glad to be
guys.
here as well.
Yeah. So, Ken, why don't you tell us a little bit about Ad Astra?
Ad Astra publishes 3-dimensional space combat and jet combat games, and also has a line of nonfiction products, and a teeny tiny 4-page RPG that I wrote, more or less because somebody on the internet made me mad. Somebody was talking about what you needed minimally in an RPG, and well, that turned into Minimus, which started out as the 1-page RPG and has since bloated to being the 4-page RPG. And it's actually one of the highest margin products that I have when I go and sell it in person, because it's a 4-page RPG that's got color on 2 pages. It sells well.
Nice. Did you just like abstract role-playing game down to like the distilled
Pretty much, yeah. That's actually what the subtitle is Minimus, Role-Playing Distilled.
Oh.
On page 1, I give you all the rules you need for character creation, including an unbreakable character creation system where nobody gets to be more powerful than the rest of the party combined unless they all agree to it. On page 2, I give you all the rules you need to play the game, including a task sequencing system that once you've used it twice, you will want to inflict it on every single role-playing game that you ever GM ever again, because it brutally punishes players for not having a plan and not paying attention to what their teammates are doing. On page 3, I give you all the rules you need to GM the game, including setting difficulty levels and creating opponents and monsters on the fly. And on page 4, I give you basically advanced GMing techniques pulled from Hollywood scriptwriting Bibles, plus a complete setting ready to run that's best described as Aaron Spelling writes Melrose Place, adultery, betrayal, marauding trolls. And I will hold this on out as a 4-page foldover RPG, as a 4-page foldover thing, and say, if other RPG designers are as confident in their ability to deliver a high-quality RPG as I am, they'd charge $1 per page their work is actually worth. But as a special convention price, if you buy page 1 with the unbreakable character creation system, page 2 with the task sequencing system, and page 3 with all the GMing tools, I will throw in page 4 with the advanced GMing techniques and the setting absolutely free.
It's like Ron Popeil's role-playing game. Oh, that's what RPG stands for. Ron Popeil's game. Why didn't we see that? Oh, well.
But that's been on my website for good gosh, 16 years now.
What made you branch into 3D flight simulators and starship shooter things?
Well, back in 2001, I was watching the Super Bowl and mucking around with, actually 2000, I was watching the Super Bowl and mucking around with a spreadsheet and realized that if your turn duration is a power of 2 seconds, and you ever so slightly fudge 1g from 9.82 meters per second to 9.762625 meters per second, all of your distances come out in even increments of 10 kilometers. And from there, it just sort of grew, because once I got that, I discovered that I had solved the displacement problem for space combat games, and then went and backfilled in all of the vector movement rules, and then popped into a mailing list called SF Consumel, and started asking a bunch of questions, and everybody was saying, well, no, displacement is just totally not worth the trouble of tracking. We've been doing vector movement games since, Mayday in 1973. This is a solved problem. And there was some pushback. And I said, but I've already solved it. And by the way, I've already solved the problem of doing proportional movement in vector movement games. What? Nobody want to do that. That's like Starfleet Battle. Yes, it is. And it solves so many problems. And once you've done that, you can incrementize how you do pivots and facing changes, and continue on for about 2 years of mailing list, 2 or 3 years of mailing list discussion back and forth, and published Attack Vector in 2004, won an Origins Award for it, and then the following year. At about the same time that I was doing this, I was introduced to Tony Valley, who was working on what eventually became Birds of Prey. Tony Valley had been a multiple-time national champion at air superiority, and also is one of the people who works on the physics models for military flight simulators, or was at that particular point in time. And he was getting a little cranky that Speed of Heat does a whole bunch of, this is your basic flight rules, and this is the chain of exceptions that you do to do these various maneuvers, because that's the way air combat games were done. And he said, well, I think I can actually make a human usable aerodynamics model out of this. And got told, that's nuts. And he said, yeah, well, I'm doing it anyway. And among the things that he did was he developed a tool called the FAD, or Pitch Heading Attitude Display, which I looked at and bounced off of because of the way that they described it. But then once I understood it, I realized it was basically a polar projection of a sphere in 30-degree increments, and then grafted that into what became Delta V, which eventually became Attack Vector. Delta V came out in 2001, and Attack Vector came out in 2004, and there are about 150 copies of Delta V out there floating, and I think Mike might actually still have one.
How did you get into?
Possibly, I'd have to look.
How did you get into wargaming to begin with? The Reader's Digest version, please.
The Reader's Digest version. In 11th grade, when I was 11 years old, somebody brought a copy of Raid on Iran to school when I was in elementary school, and we played that at recess a couple of times. Totally botched up the rules, but we played that at recess. And that actually turns out to be like the second game that Steve Jackson Games ever published.
Interesting.
After that, I kind of got hooked and bumped into Starfleet Battles in the late 1990s after playing Dungeons and Dragons, and then a little bit of Traveller, and then a little bit of Champions, and then a fair bit of GURPS through the 1980s. In the 1990s, I played even more GURPS and had what might be the best GURPS campaign ever, which was one set during the Second Crusade, when that was run by all of the grad students who are teaching the medieval history class that I was taking. So we're doing a medieval history GURPS game with actual medieval historians who are citing their source material. It was great. I've never had an experience like that ever since.
Awesome. And Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got into gaming and
it was literally a lateral move from building scale models. I was at the store in Cottingtown Mall in Northern California, and was looking at models and kept going to the left, and suddenly there were games. I ended up taking a copy of Starfire home, and at the hippie elementary program I was in, I was poring over the rule book and pushing a couple counters around for scenario 1 of Starfire, and other kids said, "Oh, you play these games too?" That afternoon, I played my first game of Ogre, and it's just snowballed from there. Yeah. The hippie alternative program was, I like to call it a hippie military academy, because we did, I think, an average of 8 games of Risk a week, played a bunch of other stuff. Alien Wizard and then Fantasy Trip were hugely popular. Played some Starfleet Battles, little Traveller here and there, which I had absolutely no idea what to do with. Figured it out later, but fifth grade me GMing Traveller was kind of a disaster. But then it all just went up, and then for recess we played usually a couple of rounds of Capture the Flag a day. So that is your strategy and theory, and then your practical tactics.
Interesting. Starfire, that's an old Starship Combat game.
Task Force Games #1. SFB was number 4.
Didn't know that. Cool.
I think I still have my original Starfire book.
And go on.
There's a game that spiraled down into infinite complexity alarmingly quickly.
Yeah, Ogre, big fun game too back in the day in Car Wars. I just played Computer Ogre. It's it's not that great, but I mean it's computerized, so it's fun. And there's explosions and things. It's a little overpriced in my opinion at $27 or something, but it recently came out in a Humble Bundle or something for like $2, and definitely worth that price. I'd say 10 would be fair. It's good and all that. But yeah. So and how did you come in to be involved with Ad Astra Games?
I was a fascinated sideliner during the great Victor movement debate that Ken was talking about earlier, and wound up meeting him in person at a game demo at Gamescape in San Francisco. And occasionally he threw up 10 Worlds project at me. I did not execute super well, but I was the turned out to be the designated survivor for Squadron Strike Traveller developers. A long and tragic history there, and I have survived participating in that development project longer now than I think than any of the or all of the previous developers on that have survived.
Yes. Well, Mark is still alive. Mark just had his baggage train hit by a rocket attack by the Taliban.
Wonderful. So you're like the crash test dummy for Squadron Strike?
Traveller.
I spend a lot of time when I'm working on it looking over my shoulder.
And also I ran into Steve Osmansky at Shore Leave this last summer. He has retired. He has recovered as much as he can from the stroke. But he went through and we played Squadron Strike Traveller there, and he had an awful lot of fun with it.
Fantastic.
We had to repeat a few things a couple of times, but
I'm really glad he liked it. It gives me a sense of personal satisfaction.
Awesome.
Yes.
Awesome. Congratulations on that. And John, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background? How did you first get into role-playing games?
I blame my father. And I say that lightly. I don't actually blame him. I was a science fiction fan literally from the cradle. I was watching Star Trek reruns almost as long as there have been Star Trek reruns when I was 2-3 years old. My parents didn't quite know what to make of me as I was growing up. They weren't expecting the bookish science fiction nerd that they got. But, they did what they could. My father was a executive for a small industrial company that had business all over the world in our hometown. And he got to the point where he would start bringing things home that he thought would interest me. And at one point, he brought me home a old game from Simulations Publications called Star Force Alpha Centauri. And I think I was maybe 9 at the time. If you have any familiarity with old SPI games, the rules were kind of dense. So I don't claim that I was doing anything appropriate with that game until I was probably a late teenager before I understood the rules properly. But it was a revelation to me. Here was a simulation of future conflicts that you could set up and run through repeatedly. And more to the point, if you recall, that game had a map, which was a very well done for its time map of the immediate solar neighborhood out to about 20 light years or so.
And that map was a thing of beauty.
Yeah, it was really well designed. And the fact that it was even possible to make a map like that kind of grabbed my attention. And ever since then, now, of course, my father continued to go on business trips, and he continued to bring things home for me that he thought would interest me. And one trip, he brought home the first 3 little black books of Traveller. Now, I had already picked up playing Dungeons and Dragons, mostly from a couple of fellow game nerds at in my elementary school, my middle school. But Traveller, of course, was the first big science fiction game that I was exposed to, and I kind of latched onto that. I very much recall my experience with trying to game master Traveller for my fellow kids was a lot like Mike. I'm not sure we ever got it quite right, but again, it was something that we had a lot of fun with. And then Book 6 came out. If you recall, Book 6 of Traveller was the original Scouts book, done by Mark Miller, Lauren Wiseman, Frank Chadwick, John Harshman. And it included the first that I had ever seen, a random design sequence for at least somewhat scientifically plausible stars and planetary systems. And something in my brain went click. Because here I had Star Force Alpha Centauri, which led me to the fact that, hey, we actually do know quite a bit about the stars in our immediate neighborhood. And now I could actually take this system from Traveller and I could make up imaginary planetary systems for these. Well, the result is at least 2 or 3 different space opera universes that are never going to see the light of day because I was, 12 at the time? But, these kind of gave me a moment of epiphany, and I've been spending the rest of my life, it's been over 40 years since then, coming up on 50 in fact, trying to see how we could do that even better, how we could support our imagination with scientifically plausible random generations so that we could sort of lean on that. Yeah, being a gamer, being a old SPI and Avalon Hill gamer from day one, being a Dungeons and Dragons and Traveller player, kind of pointed me in that direction of how can we come up with worlds that seem plausible as well as gameable. I recall Mike mentioning that, or actually no, it was Ken mentioning that there was actually a mathematical insight that got him started on his path. For me, it was very similar. If you recall book 6, that's the old Scouts book among the classic Traveller release, among some of the other things it had an actual mathematical formula for computing the average surface temperature of a world. And here I was 12 or so, and I said, okay, I can take this. I took that and plugged in the values that I knew for Earth. And the result came out wrong. And at the time, I did not have the scientific or the mathematical sophistication to figure out what the heck had gone wrong. But that kind of bugged me. And for many years afterwards, with multiple other games that I investigated, I probably have 5 or 6 role-playing games on my shelves that involve some kind of world design system as part of them. I kept coming back to that until I was in my mid-30s and realized, hey, I actually know enough mathematics now and enough science to go back and rederive that formula. And lo and behold, what I ended up with was slightly different from what Classic Traveller had. And that kind of got me started on, okay, hey, I can apply math and fairly basic planetary science to this problem of designing realistic worlds. And I started collecting tricks and techniques and bits of math and science, all of which eventually got me to writing 3 different such systems for GURPS Traveller and for GURPS, and eventually writing Architect of Worlds. So that's the long story.
And I sometimes joke that Architect of Worlds is what happens when you have somebody who has to write one of those chapters 3 different times and suddenly realizes there's no editor to tell him, no, you've used too many words.
I did joke on Facebook back when I was getting serious about pulling this book together finally. I joked on Facebook that this is probably the first role-playing game supplement I've ever seen that actually has several dozen scientific citations in it. Mm-hmm. I actually got Mark Miller to chuckle over that one, so I felt like I'd accomplished something that day.
Yeah, I think that book addresses a common gripe, which is, the tables as they were not very realistic, and look at what we know now, and I just tune it out. So yada yada. But yeah, you should. People have definitely wanted like a more realistic, more nuanced, more updated, like star system maker for their various games. So I think this is a great idea, and it's super thorough. We can talk more about it. How did you, John, end up coming into contact with these guys and for Ad Astra and pitch this book?
Oddly enough, I didn't pitch it. Architect of Worlds started out as purely a labor of love. It was something that I would have written for Steve Jackson Games back in the day, but it was never. It really wasn't a product that they were going to be interested in. I used to joke when I was first pulling the book together that, yeah, I would probably self-publish it, put it up on RPG Now or what have you, and sell maybe 6 copies.
We're at 140 sold so far, by the way.
Yeah, exactly.
Congrats.
But I've known Ken for quite a few years now. Ken being a superb salesman, of course, I think he sold me Squadron Strike at least 3 times over the past 20 years. Of course, I've known about Ad Astra Games. I used to be a Starfleet Battles player. I used to play a lot of the vector movement games like Mayday for Traveller back in the day. So when I first noticed Squadron Strike or Attack Vector, I was like, aha, somebody's doing it really well here. So I was always intrigued by that. Ken and I have been acquaintances online for a long time. He's been aware for years that I've been working on this particular project. And probably about a year and a half ago, when I went from, okay, I have actually written the entire book in rough draft, now I'm going to start laying it out and doing final editing on it. And I started reporting on that on my Facebook page and my blog. He finally, Ken, like last fall?
So I was first aware of Architect in June of 2022 when I was giving you some feedback on it. And around September when you started it was actually around July of last year because I was trying to actually meet up with you when I went down to shore leave.
I remember that. Mm-hmm.
Yep. That was when you were first starting to throw this into page layout land with InDesign. And asking questions about how the heck do you format equations in InDesign? And the short answer is, oh, God, please don't.
Yeah, that was an interesting learning curve.
Yes. Better you than me. Around September is when I said, so when you actually have this laid out, I'd be interested in publishing it. And then we went back and forth on a few things and nudged you here and there on font choices and rotating your M's and W's. That's a story. And then you turned the file over at the end of July. Sorry, not the end of July, at the end of January. And I started doing an editing pass on it from the layout books. Then I got to the week before Gamma Expo and vanished off the face of the earth, then went to Gamma Expo, continuing vanishing off the face of the earth, where the prototype of the book got lots of interesting thumb-throughs, and then came back from Gamma Expo with a horrible chest cold, and lost most of March to that. So I'm now the one who is the choke point into making the book late. I am currently on my 3rd pass through the book and filling out things for John to fix. But I'm hoping to actually get that turned over tonight or tomorrow morning. I can see the end.
You can see the light at the end of the tunnel. Hopefully it's not an oncoming train.
Yeah, or, the fire up on a plasma thruster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Wait,
so
I think I see something ahead.
Yeah, as Ken remarks, I mean, I did not approach him. He approached me, and I allowed him to believe that I was taking several weeks to think about it. Actually, my decision took about 15 minutes. The rest was all details. Because, of course, Ken and Ad Astra, they have the marketing and promotion and even production capability that I would have to develop myself. So,
right.
Yeah, and if I were retired and trying to do this full time, maybe, but it's just as well since my day job has been slightly insane for the last 6 months. So I'm just as happy to have Ken publishing this, and I've already been very, very happy with the results even before the book is officially out.
And so, Ken, what have you been up to? What has Ad Astra been up to since our last Mayday?
So, the Birds of Prey crew is working on effectively a 2nd edition of the game, and that has consumed a tremendous amount of my time. So one of the things that they did Do you know what a nomogram is?
No.
Okay. Birds of Prey uses nomograms extensively. A nomogram is a tool where you take 3 different scales. One is an input scale. The 2 on the outside are input scales, and the one in the middle is the value you're looking up. And you take a straight edge, and you put one edge of the straight edge on the number you're inputting, and the other end of the straight edge on the other number you're inputting, and look across where it crosses the middle line. And there are some rules for going up or down, depending on the calculation you're doing, and you find your intermediate value. These are effectively slide rules that don't slide. So Birds of Prey, and I say this coming from Attack Vector, is a little bit insane in that its sequence of play normally has 15 or 16 steps that you go through for each turn that you go through. And once you've internalized all of the steps, they go fairly quickly, but that learning curve is a learning cliff for the first time through. Now, what you get out of this with Birds of Prey is that you actually have a flight simulator that runs entirely on pen and paper. In fact, one of my standard jokes about all of my products is that I make flight simulators for people with slow eyesight and bad reflexes. So they're now replacing those nomograms with a custom circular slide rule. They're also looking at the thrust performance calculations that they're doing, and have found what looks to be a better way to do it. That when they do it also means that Birds of Prey will open up to power calculations as opposed to thrust calculations, which means that the Birds of Prey engine could actually go back to doing World War II stuff, which it currently cannot.
Oh, that's cool.
So I have been proofreading that, helping them get new products out, and spending an awful lot of time making prototypes of play aids and sending them out to their play testers, and have done 3 rounds of custom prototypes with circular slide rules for them. And those take a fair bit of effort to put together and ship on out. I also sold out of Romance of the Seven Realms, and what was going to be a quick and dirty swap out the artwork has turned into a complete reimagining and redoing of the product, making it a significantly better product. Romance of the Seven Realms is the Squadron Strike product that I put together when I heard about X-Wing 2nd Edition coming on out, and saw how Fantasy Flight was promoting X-Wing 2nd Edition, which was poorly. As the marketing director at Amarillo Design Bureau, when they came out with Federation Commander, which I am basically the uncredited co-designer of, I basically had to rap Steve Cole across the knuckles a few times to keep him from saying nasty things about Starfleet battles, because he was all enthused about Federation Commander and wanted everybody to switch. Do not diss the customers who have loved your product for 25 years. Thank you.
Right.
Just don't. Talk about the things your new product does. But talk about them in positives as opposed to the old way, which was horrible.
Right. Instead of counting up 1 million dots on an SSD like the old way.
Yes.
Yeah.
At the same time that they were doing this, D&D 4th edition was coming on out, and I watched Wizards of the Coast gut themselves on their own marketing petard, or hoist themselves on their own marketing petard for D&D 4th edition. So I learned those lessons well doing the launch of Federation Commander, and a dozen years later, I watched Fantasy Flight launch the 2nd edition of X-Wing, and just make the same mistakes. And the thing is the 2nd edition of X-Wing is a substantial improvement to the way that X-Wing actually plays. They have regularized it. They got rid of a lot of the really quirky rules. They made things more consistent. They opened up the design space for a wider range of planes and a wider range of pilot abilities. And the way that they launched it pretty much crushed the casual X-Wing community, because X-Wing had 2 different communities, much like Starfleet Battles did. There is the tournament crew, who play competitive X-Wing or play competitive Starfleet Battles, who drive almost all of the rules questions and standing off the rough bits of the game. And then there's the casual play group who don't really care too much about the rules. They want to, they want to shove fighters around and make pew 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 noises and roll dice and see things blow up.
Mm-hmm.
And the tournament crew does a great job doing long-term development for the casual player base in both games. And when Fantasy Flight launched X-Wing 2nd Edition, they split what used to be 3 factions into 5. They sold a $50 upgrade kit that would replace the bits that you needed for one of those 5 factions, and did it in such a way that they managed to completely alienate the entirety of their casual play base, while also causing every one of their tournament players to say, "Oh, this is just a stupid cash grab," because in order to use your $2,000 X-Wing collection, you might have to spend, oh my gosh, you'd certainly have to buy 5 of those upgrade kits for $250, and you might have to buy 6 or 7 to get duplicates of the other things that you need for your favorite sub-faction now. At which point I smile at those people and go, "Oh, sweet summer child, look at Games Workshop."
Yeah, that's why I don't play Warhammer, because when it first came out, you had to have the what was in the box was random, and so you'd have to buy multiple boxes to get like enough bolters and chain swords or whatever to make your little army. And eventually, I guess they standardized them, but I was already out of it by then.
So in many ways, Romance of the Seven Realms came on out as let's see if we can get some of the disaffected X-Wing players to come play Squadron Strike, because, X-Wing is still a plot, move, shoot, maybe repair things kind of sequence of play, which is what Squadron Strike uses. And so I totally did store brand X-Wings and TIE Fighters, only with a setting that was inspired by 1930s movie serials about heroic, daring pilots who are Knights Orbital, trying to help the Fisher Queen unite the Seven Realms against the onrushing City hegemony. And yes, the Fisher Queen is Queen Carrie of the House of Fisher.
Gotcha.
So that came on out, and it sold fairly well. Not gangbuster distance, but it was set up in such a way that it had effectively a short print run. And I knew that I was running low on it in 2022 or thereabouts. So I reprinted the counter sheets for it with new updated art. And like I said, I was originally just planning on swapping out the artwork and doing the same product, except that we had, more fighters. So that turned the center section into an SSD book. And oh, hey, we have this throw-in game that we did on the inside cover. Let's go get feedback on the players and see what would make this game more fun. And that turned that 12 pages into a 24-page rule book for Romance of the Seven Realms for Flight of the Fisher Queen. And then there wasn't much left of the setting book, so let's expand that on out. Oh, hey, look, there's this campaign system for Star Wars. For X-Wing, let's see if there's any ideas that we can pull from it for improving your fighters, for improving your fighter pilots. And hey, nobody ever actually used the Elan rules for using mystical abilities based on the power of chivalry. So let's expand those and make them easier to understand. And oh, hey, here's this tool for making decks of cards. Let's actually go make pilot cards for these named pilots. And hey, let's make special ability cards for these knightly orders. Oh, hey, if I do this and this, and it just sort of grew. As soon as I get Architect back to Jon, I'm doing the final proofreading pass through those 2 booklets, and we'll be launching the 2nd edition of Romance of the Seven Realms. Because they are now text complete, and I'm using the time that I'm proofreading Architect to scrub them out of my short-term memory, so I will look at them with fresh eyeballs and do an editing pass as I do the last little tweaks in page layout.
Awesome.
And you're going to have to verbally describe this as I post this image up, but I want you to see something cute here as we're talking about Romance of the Seven Realms. That would be over here. Let's go. There we go. So I'd like you to take a look at that and describe it to your listeners here. It's in the text chat.
Looks like a character sheet on a card.
Kinda. That is actually 2 cards overlaid. The bit on the edge, on the outside, are the basic. So Squadron Strike Romance of the Seven Realms has 4 levels of integrate mystical special abilities. And I bring this up because this could also be of use to people who, say, want to have psi abilities in Traveller. So that second piece there is a Knightly Order card for somebody who has the Order of Rogers. All of the Knightly Orders are named after action movie stars, believe it or not.
Okay.
And all of their iconic abilities all of their abilities that they use in Squadron Strike terms are, based off of their iconic roles. But on the left, those Elan abilities are all defensive. If you have an Elan-attuned pilot who is not a member of a Knightly Order, you just get those abilities on the left. If your pilot is a member of a Knightly Order, you get the abilities on the left plus the ability on the main part of the card. That Knightly Order ability on the card is 2.5 inches wide because a poker-sized card is 2.5 by 3 inches. A named pilot, like the Dark Lady Kathleen, you just lay it over the Knightly Order card because she's already a member of a Knightly Order. She's in fact a member of 2, plus has a special ability of her own. Now you have a nice compact display of all of the special abilities. And it just so happens that the 3-up SSD has each of the SSDs being 3.5 inches tall. So a portrait style card is exactly the same height as the SSD. So it lays out very nicely on the tabletop. This is what happens when I start going down rabbit holes on graphic design and layout.
Yeah, it's very cool. Clever way of adding that little additional information like sidebar. Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
The nice thing about the system that we're using for the mystical powers of Elan is that I now have a chip pull system where, depending on the grade of your pilot, basically there's squires, knight errants, and knight masters. You put a certain number of chips into a cup of certain values, and everybody puts them in the same cup. And at the start of each turn, everybody pulls one chip, looks at it, and puts it face down in that little white space on the Elan powers bit here. Then you basically flip the chips over as you spend the points. And if you spend any points off of your chip whatsoever, it gets discarded. If your chip is a value of 0, it gets discarded at the end of the turn. If you don't spend your chip, it gets put back in the cup to be drawn later. So there's a little bit of give and take. And do I want to use these abilities this turn, or do I want to try pulling a different chip next turn?
Gotcha.
If you take a look at the Dark Lady Kathleen, you'll notice that she draws 3 chips and keeps 1, returns the others to the cup. And every enemy chip drawn is worth 1 less to a minimum of 0. She is kind of terrifying because if you draw a chip that is worth 1, you can't spend it. Since you can't spend it, it goes back in the chip, and it's still there later in the game for her to draw.
Mm-hmm. Right, cool. Very cool. That's a cool mechanic. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Sorry, got enthused about the project that I'm currently working on.
And Mike, what have you been up to since our last Mayday? Aside from doing something with your mic.
Yeah, it's not a lot of active development. Last year at work sucked. In a lot of very, very stressful ways, basically centered around, hey, we're gonna be doing layoffs, and it took 6 months to find out whether we got through or not. So I basically told my boss in my review that I didn't completely lose my shit at any point, and I'm marking that as a major accomplishment.
All right.
So that has completely burned my creative energies.
Mm-hmm.
Looking forward to getting things going again this year. Get some pros down, get some ships designed.
So you've been sidelined pretty much for the last year, game design wise.
Yeah, pretty much sidelined. Lost year creatively. And that's what my side hobbies for watching not completely gripping TV is building scale models. I think I completed 3. Out of a more usual 12 to 15 in a year.
What kind of models do you like to make?
A mix of Gunpla, which is the nice high quality snap together stuff that, from a traditional scale model perspective, might look as kind of easy mode. You just snap them together and you've got a thing.
Are those like the Batman ones or whatever, where they have modular arms and heads and
mostly Gundam.
Oh, Gundam.
And that's as a mindfulness exercise, looking at the instructions, pulling your pieces together, and then building a mental picture of how they fit together, the part you're building, and how that fits to the rest of it is a really soothing, calming mental thing. I got a bunch of incomplete ones because that's something I really needed last year. And I also dabble in 1/700 scale ships, a Japanese armored cruiser, partly painted and put together. That's coming along, and aircraft mostly 144 because I really like the small size of things, and you can get a lot of those into one display case. So that's about where I've been able to spend any energies at all.
All right. Well, I hope you get more free time to pursue your interests, because it sucks to be nose to the grindstone all the time.
No, this is a 4-day weekend because I'm hitting my PTO accumulation limit again.
Oh, all work and no play.
Yep, and hopefully get some stuff done over the extra free time.
All right. And you, John, have you been primarily working on Architect of Worlds over the past year, or?
Yeah, last year was almost entirely devoted to teaching myself the mysteries of Adobe InDesign and figuring out how to lay out the book and doing editorial work along the way. The Architect has been an interesting project all along because I will literally see new scientific results, a new paper gets published out there, and I realize, okay, I've got to rewrite a chunk of the book now.
Stop making discoveries. Now I have to edit this chapter.
I literally, last fall, I told my patrons and pre-readers and whatnot, okay, I'm drawing a line. This is absolutely the last bit of new research I'm looking at. Anything after this is going to be in the second edition of the book, if there ever is one.
And then I went to, that was in November. That was in late November, basically the Sunday of Thanksgiving weekend.
I think that's right. Yes.
Yep. Oh, it was. I remember it quite well because then I went and tipped over the apple cart and said, I need an extra page to balance out the page counts. How about a science marches
John's
on
audio
section?
cutting out for anybody else?
No.
Wasn't for me. John, sound check.
No, I'm fine.
Okay.
Sounds fine.
And just today, as I'm going through the third pass,
audio.
and then just today, I sent John an email saying, "So, I'm probably going to be eating up enough space with a little tweaks and things on here. Would you like me to write a section on atmosphere scale heights?"
That's in the book already, isn't it?
If it is, I've missed it, but that seems to be about the only detail that I've ever found in world building that I did that you didn't do. So I'll take a look.
I'm pretty sure there is a computation really late in the design sequence for scale height.
Okay.
And specifically because if you think about it, Earth-like worlds, habitable worlds, are kind of facing the Anna Karenina problem. All really pleasant worlds are pleasant the same way, but all not quite habitable worlds are not quite habitable in different ways. And one of the ways you could get an Earth-like but not quite habitable world is if the air is just too thick, or there's too much oxygen in the air at sea level, then okay, would it be reasonable to expect settlers to settle highlands, mountain ranges and whatnot, and would it be comfortable for them there? So scale hike's important to figuring that out.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's in there.
Okay. Then I missed it, and I'll see it when I get to it on the third pass.
Fair enough.
Because that is one of the things that we calculated for doing the world building in the 10 worlds.
10 worlds, yes, I remember seeing that in your spreadsheets for that.
Yep. And one of the amusing things about the world building we did for the 10 worlds is that one of the planets that we spec'd out in 2003 is a just on the edge of habitability, what you would call a failed core, as opposed to an oligarch. And it has just enough gravity and insulation from its star that it lost the hydrogen, but it kept the helium. And
that
it has.
That was actually an interesting factor. For a long time, the Architect of Worlds models assumed that a planet not too much larger or denser than Earth would probably retain helium at the very least. So you got this picture of all sorts of very Earth-like looking worlds where everybody would sound like Mickey Mouse as they're walking around on the surface. Quite recently, I did some reading that indicated that probably wasn't as you would need something quite a bit heftier than Earth to be able to pull that off. Yeah. So the final version of Architect, literally, I think that last bit of research you and I were talking about made for this final change, so that it would be a lot less likely for an otherwise Earth-like to still have a lot of helium in the atmosphere. So yeah, the science has been a moving target, well, literally for the last 30 years, ever since we started detecting exoplanets in the first place.
So did you do like a survey of all the known exoplanets and like note their various characteristics?
I spent a lot of time reviewing. One of the main reasons I started writing Architect in the first place is because almost immediately after we started discovering exoplanet candidates, it became painfully obvious that the models for the structure of planetary systems that, for example, classic Traveller or Universe or a lot of those older games used just wasn't going to cover all the cases. For example, some of the earliest, you've heard of hot Jupiters, massive gas giant planets that are snugged up so close to their primary stars that
they whip around in days.
Yeah, and they're immensely hot. It's like the old model just would never generate something like that.
And when we say whip around in days, we mean in double-digit days, double-digit days.
Yeah, I think the record is we've detected at least one of those that actually circulates in less than 24 hours. It's astonishing to think of. So the exoplanet boom started about the same time I wrote the world design system for the 4th edition of GURPS Space, which would have been about 2005 or so. So that did include a little bit of that, okay, your planetary system may not be this bog standard, little rocky planets close in, gas giants in the middle, that kind of thing. Now, since then, we've discovered all sorts of weird cases that even that model that was in GURPS Space would not work today, would not cover all the cases that we're seeing. I think that Architect does a decent job of covering most of the weird cases we've seen over the last couple decades. For example, another fairly recent addition to the model. We've detected a few cases of planetary systems that have at least one really solid gas giant way, way out in the outer reaches of the star system. Most gas giants you think are like Jupiter. They form close to what's called the snow line, where water ice was stable in the early nebula. But these are massive gas giants that actually are quite some distance outside that line.
Well, aren't Neptune and Uranus both gas giants?
Well, they are, although I call them gas giants in Architect. A lot of astronomers prefer to call them ice giants because their formation process seems to have been a little different. But yeah, they're similar, kind of rocky, icy core with a dense hydrogen-helium atmosphere. But it's less massive than Jupiter or Saturn.
Right.
Architect kind of keeps track of that gradient in mass. And
so these outlier planets would be more like the size of Jupiter, but out in the
or even heavier than Jupiter.
Okay.
For example, trying to recall, I believe the Epsilon Indi star system in our own neighborhood, we've detected a massive gas giant that is much further out than we would otherwise expect. Well, it turns out, yes.
Their masses are 3.
I don't recall. I'd have to look it up. But
okay.
Empty. That kind of attracted my attention. So, as an example of where very recent research got immediately folded into the book, there's a more recent model. It's just been published in the last 2 or 3 years that suggests, under some circumstances, you recall, when a star initially forms, it has this disk of gas, dust, and other material around it, and that's what the planets form out of. Well, if that disk becomes unstable, it can actually develop what looks like spiral arm structures. It doesn't become a uniform disk. All of a sudden, you get these thick lanes spiraling out from the inner part of the disk to the outer part. And the assumption is that these can actually give rise to gas giant planets at considerable distances. And lo and behold, some of our telescopes have actually imaged the protoplanetary disks of some nearby stars, and look, there they are, the spiral arm structures that are predicted by the hypothesis. Some of them even obviously tied up with the formation of new planets. So it's like, okay, we're actually seeing this happen. I immediately rewrote a big chunk of Architect of Worlds to generate that kind of distant gas giant planet. So that tended to happen every 2 or 3 months almost the whole time I was writing the book. Some new piece of science would crop up. We really are living in a golden age for astronomical research, but of course it means that planetary astronomy right now is an enormous moving target. So as of last fall, I think Architect is pretty good. That doesn't mean that there won't be some interesting new results over the next few years that drive me to write a second edition.
And speaking of the ice giants, one of the other weird things about Uranus and Neptune is that the reason why they are sort of blue-green is that they are far enough away from the sun that UV light has not broken down the ammonia in their atmosphere.
That's right. I parallel that.
And that also implies,
not go nearly as far,
Mike.
but the book 6 planetary system generation stuff was a ton of fun, and grade school me rolled a lot of dice and mentally visited a lot of worlds, and having something up to the modern science, that's a good act. That is bringing something to the world.
Yep. But back to the ice giants. One of the things that is implied by Uranus and Neptune is that, first of all, we now have a pretty solid hypothesis that before the rocky planets form, while they're still a planetary nebula, drag against the protoplanetary disk will cause planets to drift inwards from the ice line. Mm-hmm. And then orbital resonance will basically start pulling them out in what's called the grand tack. And then there's often one of the things that both Uranus and Neptune imply is that they were never actually pulled closer in towards Sol, because if they had, they wouldn't have their ammonia anymore. Mm-hmm. Because ammonia is one of the first compounds that breaks down when you get UV light hitting your atmosphere.
There's also a good chance that there was actually a third ice giant out there early in the planetary system's history, and that about 500 million years after the solar system formed, there was a chaotic interaction among all the gas giant and ice giant planets that ejected that extra. That's one reason, for example, why Neptune is so far out. And Architect actually can handle all these cases.
It's awesome. And who is the target market again for this? It's like is it Traveller players and sci-fi writers, or?
There's a school of thought in a lot of role-playing game design that says you don't care about scientific plausibility. You just want a interesting setting, and this book is not for that. It's way too it's way too complex, way too dense for folks who would prefer to just roll on a few lookup tables and get the interesting planet for their next game session. And I'm not dissing that style of play. It's perfectly viable, and I've done it any number of times myself.
Sure, but it ends up with like a lot of incongruencies. Like
you can. I expect the main target audience is going to be for people who really loved the Book 6 system, who just liked rolling up random regions of space, because that's a mini game in and of itself.
Right.
I suspect
it's an exploration game with it's a solo exploration game with a little bit of not a little bit, but with a certain amount of algebra for sprinkles
and a little bit of social studies.
I expect. Yeah, I expect game players, game designers, referees who are interested in putting a little extra effort into scientific plausibility. I fully expect science fiction authors might find this book interesting. I've been told about one very well-established science fiction author who has written a blurb for the book and is getting a copy. That would be C.J. Sheriff. Right.
Sherry, actually.
Sherry? Okay.
Yep.
I've also been told that there's a second one, and Ken is playing very coy about that one. My wife and I have a bet as to when we finally see the back cover of the book, who that's going to be. And I have had a couple other, not quite that top tier science fiction authors, but folks who have expressed interest in the book. So. I suspect it may be a reference for a lot of people.
The book is crazy, like complete. It's like it's almost 200 pages, and it's got it's pretty complete. It's got everything I could think of and more for building up planetary systems and stuff, and it's laid out nice. Looks like a pretty nice source book, so congrats on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's very comprehensive, so if anybody's interested in building more detailed systems, which I know a lot of people are, because I see it everywhere. I see it on Reddit, on Facebook, everywhere where Traveller discussions are, people are complaining about it in the old version and wishing it was more up to date with current stuff. The thing I kind of liked about that old style was being able to code all of the planets into like a digit, but that only gives you so many granular slices, and it's hard to remember, if you use it a lot, you remember, but some of the digits are like, some are obvious, like, if it's a 6 for water, that's 60% water, but and if it's a 6 for the population, that's 6 zeros, but they're not all like that. So
the book is game system agnostic. It uses SI units, what people think of as metric, for almost everything. It uses a few idiosyncratic units like astronomical units and Earth masses and things like that, just when those are most convenient. would
And
be
solar masses.
Yeah, would not be at all difficult to use the book to generate and then convert into whatever game system you're planning on doing. In fact, at one point, I actually produced a short Architect of Worlds for Traveller, which is available on my website, and I believe I also posted it to the Traveller RPG Facebook group. Essentially, it abstracted a lot of the finicky details and a lot of the math to do something very close to classic Traveller world development. There's like one big lookup table, and what you'll end up with is worlds that will slot very nicely into any classic Traveller or related game, but you'll avoid some of the scientific absurdities that the original system occasionally threw.
Mm-hmm.
Like planetary systems that were denser than, Earth-like planets with a density higher than iron.
Yeah, that was a pretty common one.
Or surface temperature. I was running Heaven and Earth, and they have surface temperatures colder than space.
Yep.
Yeah, I suspect Heaven and Earth... I've never been able to verify that, but I suspect Heaven and Earth might actually be using the original Book 6 formulae for surface temperature, and of course, that's not quite right. So
yeah, whereas the density problem with classic Traveller, the planetary density problem was, and Lauren Wiseman just fessed up to this when I talked to him about it. It was a case of they were internally using miles and they converted to kilometers at the very last minute and didn't adjust the density calculations. And that's why all of the densities are 1.6 times as high as they should be.
Interesting. Yeah, the other density problem implicit is it's rare in the classic Traveller system, but it does happen. Worlds the size of the moon with Earth-like atmospheres. The surface gravity that you would have to have in order for that to be plausible means that the planet is considerably denser than iron. Again, that's the kind of thing that if you're obsessive compulsive about scientific plausibility like I am, that'll bother you.
Well, I can see one possible use for that. That planet is a treasure trove of heavy metals.
It would have to be really heavy metals, but yeah, possible.
I know that. Like Paul Anderson
gold
used
and
something
lead
like
and uranium.
Oh no, not gold and lead and uranium, rubidium.
Possible.
Densitonium, duh.
Or it could be a civilization, the relic of a civilization that. Who's the author who talked about importing black holes and crushing the moon? The title of his series is The Collapsium. Is that ringing any bells with anybody?
No, but I love to make up silly names like that. Like, we could get to the densitonium, except it's right next to unstable veins of explodium.
Kaboomites.
Will McCarthy, right? He wrote a series of He wrote a series of novels where there's a lot of people using literally neutronium and black holes and whatnot to do large-scale engineering around the solar system. And you get a lot of not just the moon with a habitable atmosphere, but asteroids with breathable atmospheres because they've imported planetary mass black holes, that kind of thing.
Right.
Very good stuff.
Density and tidal stress, which is the other part that you get with density, is a common bugaboo or is a commonly omitted and overlooked thing with science fiction writers. With Saganami Island, which, by the way, is the other thing that ate a bunch of time last year, was I'm now manufacturing it but not publishing it. That's an interesting story at some point. With Saganami Island Tactical Simulator, when I was working on that for David Weber, one of the things that I was doing was myself and the people who were working on Saganami Island were basically David's sounding board for scientific stuff for the Honor Harrington universe. And I worked out what the shear stress had to be for the gravitational wedges that are part of the Honorverse ship designs, and discovered that if you powered up your wedge in low planetary orbit, you'd be able to track the flight path of the ship by the mountain ranges it was pulling up out of the mantle.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, there was the great resizing because David forgot that mass goes up at a cubic function with volume. And he was talking about the masses of ships and the lengths of ships. And once you got past destroyers, they got farther and farther and farther apart, where the super dreadnoughts, the densest component on a super dreadnought was the crew.
Yeah, you imagine these enormous battleships that are about as dense as smoke.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's a common problem with science fiction writers that we're trying to help them fix by giving them better tools.
Right. Yeah,
I have a potentially awkward
Go ahead, Mike.
question about the world building. Is it all clean sheet design of solar systems and planets, or is there some way to say, I want a system with a planet like this? And
it is absolutely possible. It is absolutely possible to cook the books to get what you want. In fact, most of the design sequence explicitly has sections after each step saying, okay, if you want an Earth-like planet, pick this range of results rather than doing it completely at random, that kind of thing. Yep. Actually, building in fine detail something that you've imagined might require a little bit of backing and filling through the design sequence. The design sequence is kind of designed like the original Book 6, which is start with a clean slate. Okay, what do these stars in this planetary system look like? How are they arranged? Okay, now how are the planets arranged? Okay, now what is the local environment on individual worlds like? But if you want a specific result and you're willing to do some back and forth through the sequence, it can be done.
No,
one of the common tropes that is common in science fiction, Pandora from the Avatar movies, pretty much requires that you hand nudge an Earth-like world as a satellite for a gas giant planet. Yeah, it seems that they don't get massive enough to actually be an Earth-like world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. I was going to ask about does do the constructions take into consideration? Does the construction sequence just end with a planet that could with a fresh, clean planet, or does it incorporate possibly like technology from the people that like terraforming or
One thing Architect absolutely does not do is get into the design of the societies that might be living on a planet.
Okay.
That's something that I decided from day one was going to be outside the scope.
All right. Go on.
Largely because, I mean, the book deals with physics. We think we understand physics pretty well. Mm-hmm. You're getting into sociology there, and the sheer range of possibilities, especially when you start thinking about non-human civilizations and whatnot.
Their tech levels.
Ken and I have been kicking around some ideas for a follow-on product that would get into that territory. Mm-hmm. But for now, Architect ends up giving you what could be a completely habitable planet. Now, whatever your...
Who the neighbors are.
There goes the local neighborhood.
Yeah, I just
the
keep
humans
dropping
moved
out,
in.
don't I? To repeat, you'll end up with a perfectly usable, habitable planet. Whatever assumptions you want to make on your game system or the science fictional universe you're trying to design about who might settle there, that's going to be up to you.
Gotcha.
As we were saying before your audio cut out, who the neighbors are, that's up to you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But that product that John mentioned in passing, I have a product that is part and parcel of designing Squadron Strike settings, because Squadron Strike, you have to design the setting before you design the ships. Otherwise, you don't have nearly as much entertaining and fun pew 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 spaceship action. I have a book that is about Squadron Strike setting design, and about a quarter of it talks about various ways to model interstellar societies, templating from history, templating from this, that, and the other. And I have another 15,000 words of how to go from how an alien species reproduces and the environment they grew up in to making a culture that makes sense for them, to making a society out of that culture, including interesting ways that you get gaps. For example, human beings have a craving for sugar because sugar was very hard to come by when we were living on the savannah. We are now in a situation where sugar is incredibly easy to come by, and that craving for sugar that is completely and totally below conscious thought is causing health problems. One of the other things that I do in that 15,000 word chunk of blob is talk about Dunbar's number. Are you familiar with Dunbar's number, Frank?
I am not, or maybe I am and don't know.
Don't know the term. So Dunbar's number is a partially discredited theory that says that human beings make shells of relationships. Mm-hmm. Most people can have about 10 to 15 close personal relationships, and they have a second larger shell that is about 50 to 60, and for extroverts up to 100 intermediate period relationships. And then there's about another 150 as a maximum, is about the maximum number of number of faces and identifiers where you know that is that person with this face and that name, and I know a small amount of detail about them.
Well, my Facebook account disagrees.
But your Facebook account is not the same number of people that you would be able to recognize that person on a street.
Yes, it is, because they're all my friends. There's nobody on my Facebook feed that I've never met.
All right. So one of the things about Dunbar's number, and it has been partially discredited, because in some ways, like a lot of sociology, has a bit of a just so story aspect to it, is that if you think of Dunbar's number and think that it is an imperfect description of something that's real in how human beings and societies and social creatures interact, it identifies that one of the things that takes you from tribal civilizations to civilizations that live that overwinter in larger conglomerates and then move back on out to where the food supply is, to permanent agricultural communities, is that a lot of what we do for making societies work is how to hack Dunbar's number. I have 1,700 followers / friends on Facebook. I am not friends with 1,700 people on Facebook. Mm-hmm. They are not people that I could call and say, hey, could I get a lift to the doctor's office? But a lot of human society is figuring out ways to jam some of our instincts for tribal communication and make them scale up to larger societies imperfectly. And that's where you get politics. So if you think about different societies or different alien species having different Dunbar's numbers and different environmental tricks and different ways that Dunbar's number expresses in their environment, they're going to have different hacks for how they make a larger society out of tribes than we do for Dunbar's number. Mm-hmm. And if you put some thought into that, and I've got a whole bunch of examples for this, you get a lot of seeds for making really different societies and cultures. Swinging us back around to Traveller, the Kukri, the centaurs, have a large Dunbar's number, but it's not a very permeable Dunbar's number, which is the reason why the Kukri are among the most aggressive species in Traveller in terms of societal aggression. They are xenophobic. They are xenophobic because basically they don't regard other creatures, other species on a mass level as being sentient. So that's an example of a hack for Dunbar's number that has long-term implications that imply things for your setting.
Interesting.
There have been several attempts to do this kind of thing. speaking of Steve Jackson games, they published, originally there was GURPS Uplift, which was based on David Grinn's space opera novels, in which you could go from very basic biological factors all the way up through a species personality. It was an interesting attempt. I suspect a lot of people would quibble with one step or another in the process.
Right. It's one of the resources I want to pillage from, assuming I can ever get my hands on a copy of the book.
Seriously?
Yep.
Well,
I don't have a copy of it.
Okay, I think I might actually be able to help you with that, but we'll talk about that offline.
Yeah, one of the things that I was just thinking of when you mentioned, John, that you were bugged by something that didn't work out right, and you plugged it in and it came up wrong. I was like, I generated a bunch of stuff with Heaven and Earth, and I was like, oh, let's see what this system looks like, and I dropped it into like Universe Simulator, which is like a universe sandbox thing. And the very first thing that happened is like the first planet was eaten by the sun within just a few years. It went careening into the sun. It's like, this doesn't work at all.
That's something that I work very hard to build into the Architect of Worlds models. A lot of the way those models are set up is because I was aiming for long-term stability. There probably is, in the short term, a lot more variety out there than Architect of Worlds would give you. But in a lot of cases, those are strange features that wouldn't last very long.
Right.
Which kind of implies a chapter or a small product that's not so much Architect of Worlds, but interstellar tourism.
Yeah. Here's some unusual
weird. Yeah, let's go see the weird thing in that system over there.
My intention, whether I ever write a second edition of the book or not, is to on my blog, and possibly Ken and I could talk about a separate publication if there ever are enough of them, notes on, special cases, unusual cases. There's a little bit of that already, but what are some, for example, the book doesn't make any distinction between what Earth looked like in the first 100 million years or so of its existence and what it looks like today.
Because for games and for fiction, we have a bit of a bias. For John, for games and for fiction, we have a bit of a bias towards places where adventurers can wander around in shirt sleeves.
Yeah. So, for example, the very young Earth probably didn't have a stable surface. It was probably had magma oceans. The atmosphere was probably largely carbon dioxide and methane. If you draw up a 50 million year old planet in Architect, you probably won't get that. So there's a bias toward older planets that have settled down and become human habitable. But that's no reason why we can't write some add-on material that says, okay, if you're interested in a very young Earth-like planet, here's how it might be different. So
could be
I intend to collect
hostile worlds and anomalies or something, or
kind of, I intend to collect notes like that, publish them on my blog, and then if there are enough of them, they'll either go into a second edition of Architect or into a follow-on product of some kind.
Yeah, very cool. All right, let's turn our attention to the future. What are your plans for between now and next Mayday, Ken?
For me, finishing off Newton's Cradle, which is text complete but not laid out. I mentioned before we started that I'm hiring somebody to do page layout because it is the part of my job that I enjoy the least, and that I have enough other hats that I can pretty much indefinitely postpone doing it. So that's the next part that is the next big project for me, is getting Newton's Cradle handed off to my page layout person. I am so close to done with Exile Stars that I'm not going to hire the page layout person to do that, but it's the thing that's immediately after finishing off Romance of the Seven Realms, hopefully this weekend. And after that, I've got 2 introductory products on the slate, plus helping Mike with Travelership Book 2. And farther down the road, we have finished off the ship designs for Ringgate, and the Ringgate line developer is now scoping out and writing out scenarios so that we can actually go through that. And in some ways, Ringgate is a derivative of Traveller in some ways. This is where I go, as you know, Bob. As you know, Bob, Squadron Strike Traveller did a weird thing with sandcasters, basically making them ablative shields that use ammunition. You spend a unit of ammunition, you get 6 shield bubbles on that facing of the ship.
Yeah, sandcasters are where I am absolute heretic in terms of how things work in Traveller. Numerous products say that sandcasters put out actual clouds of sand. My heresy is that no, they don't. It's the space equivalent of pocket sand. It's dazzlers, jammers, decoys, counter missiles, all sorts of things stuffed into a canister and popped out of the ship when people are being cross with you and trying to put holes in your ship. And
in Squadron Strike Traveller, we mentioned in passing in one of the fiction bits for the tutorial that it's basically piezoelectric crystals that are charged up and held in a magnetic field around the ship. And because the magnetic field and because the magnetic field is not perfect, they dissipate fairly quickly as a large particle ideal gas in a vacuum.
Sure. Or as they take incoming hits. I mean, that makes sense.
Or as they take incoming hits, yeah. And the original Traveller sandcasters had you spending them reactively as a laser got fired at you, which makes me scratch my head a little bit and go, okay, there's that.
How do they follow you?
But what I ended up doing to make Squadron Strike Traveller work is I made what's called burst mode shielding. And then for Ringgate, I went, well, what happens if we use the burst mode shielding modality with ships that are constrained by something in the setting? And can we make this interesting to fly? And what I ended up doing was making a setting that is sort of the interference pattern between H.P. Lovecraft and Arthur Clarke. Long story made short, the global warming catastrophe that's in our future was worse than was expected, and in the 22nd century, the global environment has changed a lot because it's very, very hard to project current politics out into a near future without getting egg on your face very quickly. And an AI-driven probe found an artifact orbiting Uranus. And when they sent a team of explorers out to look at it, they managed to turn it on, extend out the power collection cables, and it punches into a different universe. A different universe where lots of physical constants are very, very different. And the constant E, 2.817 shows up in a lot of unusual places compared to our universe. And it turns out that you can travel from that universe. You can travel within that universe and find other ring gates in that universe and pop back out into what seems to be ours. It's kind of hard to tell until you actually get a broadcast back from that you've actually transited in our universe. And then they figured out that they could build their own ring gates, put them through ours in pieces, assemble them in ring space, and use an awful lot of energy to punch them through into systems that don't have a ring gate. And one of the places that they discovered in there was a place where there's a Jovian planet that has over 10,000 O'Neill cylinders orbiting this Jovian planet that are all filled with corpses.
Interesting.
Yeah.
An alien necropolis?
Yes, an alien necropolis. A very large alien necropolis. And there are all kinds of implications for what's going on between ring space and our universe. And one of the compelling theories is that the ring space universe, the Ring Gate universe, ring space, is the original universe. And because of the way that time works, because of the way the time compression works between the two, you can literally put a power plant in our universe and run a jumper cable through into ring space, and because power is energy over time, use it as a power extraction mechanism from our universe. And that might be the original purpose of the ring gate of these ring gates, was that they were created to extract power from a different universe, a la Asimov's novel *The Gods Themselves*.
Interesting.
At which point, people coming through ring gates are effectively termites eating at your power supply.
Right. It's like those zero-state engines that are slurping power from other dimensions.
Yes, and maybe that's not exactly the smartest thing.
Right.
And one of the other implications, by the way, is that dark energy in our universe is effectively the mind tailings of this energy extraction process.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. And you, Mike, what have you got lined up for this next year?
Lead Book 2. Getting as much of that done into playtest as I possibly can. I've got sketch notes on basically a potted history of the Soleimani Rim War, which was an interesting one in Traveller terms. Soleimani fleet doctrine was built around to jump 5 ships for deep strikes, going after logistics. It almost worked.
Mm-hmm.
It just had one of the worst cases of poor timing in military history. They struck 2 years before the Imperium started rolling out its Jump 4 Tech Level 15 ships, which were individually superior, and they rolled out an awful lot of them. It only gone a few years earlier, they might have pulled it off. That's why the Soleimani Rim has a big bite taken out of it where their capital was. So I get to explain that in some detail, and then also build some compelling fiction around the Soleimani Task Force, known as the Marys, their Task Force Antoinette, and their personal lives and relationships as they start losing friends.
All right. Well, we'll look forward to that at next. I'll check in next Mayday. Make sure you've progressed on that.
Yep. And I've also...
I'm hoping Ken will be checking in with me more often than that.
Yes. I've also been helping another writer of mine write a novel in the Exile Stars setting. So I gave him a set of characters that you would find in naval and space translations of naval fiction. And he had an idea, and he went with this idea. And now I'm getting effectively a voyage of exploration as seen through the point of view character who is a supernumerary Marine first lieutenant, who's not part of the Marine detachment of this ship formally. And he's managed to make it work. So I sometimes have to, nudge him with a stick from time to time to get him back to the stories of exploration, but it's interesting.
Awesome.
At some point, I would be interested in reading the story of a voyage of explanation.
Of explanation or exploration, yes.
All right.
I should actually send you a chunk of that, Mike. Mike and John, I think you'd both enjoy it. This is also a project that I've tried to dangle in front of John as a temptation for writing short fiction.
I see. And John, what's your? You got any plans for the next year? Gonna work on an expansion, or just sit back and see?
Aside from getting Architect out the door and helping Ken to promote that, I think my next big project is going to be developing a role-playing game. There's a space opera universe that I've been developing for some time. It's kind of a cross between Star Trek and David Grinn's Uplift universe. Yes, human beings are starting to go out into the stars and explore and establish colonies and have adventures, but we're not doing it on our own. We're doing it as a previously conquered client state of a very old and much more sophisticated interstellar culture. And am I still coming through?
Yes.
You are.
Okay. I'm currently working on basically a setting Bible, which is also going to take the form of a role-playing game source book, on the off chance that I may get to publish it in that form at some point. The goal is to flesh out this universe in which I'm writing occasional fiction, but I suspect it's different enough from the other role-playing games that are out there in this space that it might attract a little bit of attention. At the moment, I'm aiming toward using the basic role-playing engine. That's Chaosium's house system. And in fact, they're doing a design challenge right now, which has some interesting rewards and terms attached to it. So basic role-playing has been released under the Orc license, so it's easy for third parties such as myself to do some writing and development for it. So we'll see where that goes. It's not going to be something that's going to be out within the year, but I'm hoping to make some good progress with it.
Awesome. All right. What about socials? If someone wants to follow you, how do they follow you, John? Do you have a author page or your blog?
My writing blog is at wordpress.sharokinspalace.com.
I'll put a link to it in the description of the video.
That would do very well. I also have a Facebook presence, but where I tend to blog daily, but that's more inconsequential. The actual planning for my upcoming projects and whatnot, and status reports for those tends to show up on my blog.
Gotcha. And you, Mike, what do you have socials or places where folks can follow you and your work?
I'm not super active on Twitter, but I am at Mike Llaneza.
Okay.
I stopped doing Facebook some time ago.
Gotcha. And Ken, how about you? How do people follow you or Ad Astra?
So I am slowly winding down Ad Astra's presence on Twitter because it has become very, 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 very hard to do.
AdAstraGames.com.
Yep. I'm at AdAstraGames.com. I'm winding down Ad Astra Games' presence on Twitter because Twitter has gotten kind of toxic. I'm on Blue Sky and on Facebook, and I am getting really worried about how... can you guys hear me at all?
Yep.
Okay. I'm getting kind of worried about how social media is evolving and turning around at this point in time. But right now, the best way to find me is on adastragames.com and on Blue Sky and on Facebook.
Gotcha.
There's Ad Astra Games LLC on Facebook, my personal Facebook page. I still sometimes post on Twitter, but my engagement on Twitter has dropped considerably over the last 7 or 8 months. Just fell off a cliff last October.
Yeah, we stopped using it too.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. What about where to find your products? I'm guessing at astragames.com?
At astragames.com, and for PDFs, we're on Wargame Vault and DriveThru RPG, and one of these days I'm going to figure out how to get my products up on itch.io.
Oh, all right. Mike, do you have any additional distribution channels for any of your side projects or you want to promote?
Everything I'm working on right now is going through Ad Astra, so
all right.
If you can find Ken, you can find me.
All right, and same question to you, John.
I don't have a lot going on Generally, any fiction I write, I either post to my blog or self-publish through Amazon. My pen name for fiction is Jon, John Allen, Alleyn. If you look for me on Amazon, you can find a few things under that.
Right. All right, then. We've come to the end of our interview. Thank you, Ad Astra and friends, for participating again in this year's Traveller Mayday event.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
So today my guests have been Ken Burnside, Mike Llaneza, and Jon Zeigler of Ad Astra Games. Look for their products wherever you buy Ad Astra Games, namely their website. So, all right, guys, thanks again. And until next time, friends, happy traveling. Don't fly solo through the galaxy. Click like to join our alliance. Subscribe for your crew pass, and enable notifications to never miss an encounter. This journey is fueled by my patrons. Thank you, patrons. Feel the thrill of discovery. Become a patron and join the adventure.